Welcome back to the channel, you curd nerds. And today we're going to be talking about flight sticks. Now, I know you've got plenty of different options when it comes to flight sticks. You've got Logitech, you've got Cytec, you've got the really expensive brands like Vorpal and VBK. But today we're going to be talking about something that ThrustMaster makes. ThrustMaster makes a Captain kit for the Airbus A320, and we're going to be unboxing and reviewing that today. And here it is, the TCA Captain Pack Airbus Edition. It comes with everything you need. You got the stick, you got the throttle quadrant, it even has spoilers and flaps and parking brake. My favorite part is it has Hall effect sensors. You will never get any stick drift out of this, like the stick drift you get from Joy-Cons or even some old cheaper Xbox controllers. You will never get any stick drift. There's no potentiometers. These are Hall effect sensors. Now this is intended to obviously replicate the Airbus A320. Now, there are a few things that are a little different, but they're not so different that they're going to break the immersion or they're going to make this thing difficult to use. If you're typed in the Airbus, this should feel very comfortable. If you're curious about getting typed in the Airbus, this is a perfect place to start. And as you can see from opening up the box, this isn't a fresh unboxing. This isn't a brand new product. I had to buy this secondhand because it is a little expensive. What that does mean is that this isn't sponsored. So every point of view or opinion or just blatant review of this is going to be my own opinion without anyone else digging through it. So let's dig into the stick. Obviously, it's a stick. It works. It wiggles. It's pretty stiff. Feels high quality. Got a decent heavy base, but not so heavy that it's going to put dents in your desk. It's got plenty of buttons. I believe 6 on each side. You can set them up for whatever you want. I don't really have them set them up for much because, well, we have the whole other throttle quadrant. It does have throttle. I do like that it's got plenty of buttons right up there on the top. You've got your autopilot disconnect on one. I've got the other one set up for the outside view. Then you've got a hat switch. Then you've got 2 different triggers on the front. So plenty of buttons for you to set this up for anything else that you might be using it for. You can use this for War Thunder or what have you. And it does work standalone. You can also replace those red buttons with smaller, clickier buttons. It's just 2 Phillips head, and it does come with an easy little screwdriver. You can have them with 1 black one, 1 red one, both black of them, both red ones like I've got set up right now. I like the red ones. It is USB Type A with no ability to replace the cable. It does have right there at the bottom the left hand or right hand, depending on where you've got the buttons set up. If you look into the button mapping, it shows if you've got it on the left side, the red button is on the right side of the stick. If you've got it on the right side, the red button's on the left side of the stick. And this is an amazing stick. I do like that it is USB Type A, and it's not some weird S cable like the Cytec X52. The Cytec X52 you can't use standalone because it does have that weird S cable. It does always have to be plugged into its throttle. And with that in mind, let's take a look at the actual throttle quadrant. This thing is awesome. You've got both your engines. The left side doesn't have any detents. The right side does have all of the actual clicky detents that you would expect to feel from the actual aircraft. But I do like that it has the lift gates for the thrust reversers instead of just a detent like you would feel in something like the Cytec X52. Now, obviously, there's some buttons and switches and such that aren't exactly like the Airbus, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But it's got some absolutely amazing slat handles and flap handles. There are also screws on the front so that you can adjust the tension for these if they're too loose from the factory or if they're too tight from the factory. This does have USB Type C so that you can replace the cable. You can mount it whichever way you see fit. I'm not really sure what that port's for. It looks like a phone jack. I probably should have done a little bit more research before making this video so I could actually see what that port's for. It does have a gear handle. It also has a auto brake handle or an auto brake knob. It has the engine selector. These are actually buttons. They're not buttons in the actual aircraft. They're the little fire indicators to tell you which engine's on fire. It does have a parking brake handle. There is no pull detent. It's just a twist. And it's got a rudder trim. It also has the auto thrust disconnect buttons that you would expect from a throttle quadrant like this. It also has an engine 1 and 2 or 3 and 4. What that means is for you people who want to fly like the 350 or the 380, you can buy another throttle quadrant and plug it in to this so that you can have all 4 engines. And what's amazing is it's just a SATA cable. It's just any old SATA cable that you can pick up at Best Buy for a couple dollars. So if you break those cables, lose those cables, want to hook this up in some weird setup that you've got personally for yourself, you can just go buy some random SATA cables as long or as short as you see fit in the event that you need to replace them. You've just got a couple screws and you can pull this thing apart.
And now that we've gone over all the features of this throttle quadrant, let's hear a message from the sponsor for this video.
All right, and here we are in Microsoft Flight Sim getting ready to test out the ThrustMaster Airbus throttle quadrant and stick setup. Now, when I first plugged this in, it didn't work at all. None of the throttles, none of the flaps, none of the spoilers, gear, none of that worked at all. The only thing that worked was the parking brake, and well, we can't really fly an airplane with just the parking brake. Believe me, I've tried. You push, you pull, you twist. It just doesn't go up. The plane just sits there. So we definitely had to set up some controls, and I wish I could export these control profiles and just put them in a download link below, but that's not really an option. So we're gonna have to go through it the hard way. So let's open up our controls menu, and the first thing that's gonna throw you off when setting this up is going to be the fact that when you click on the actual throttle quadrant, the engine throttle quadrant, whatever you want to call it, it only shows you the center. It doesn't show you the slats, doesn't show you the flaps, it doesn't show you the parking brake, so it's kind of hard to figure out what button correlates with what. All right? So if you look down in the link below, you'll find that there's a little PDF from ThrustMaster that shows you which buttons correlate with which buttons, which switches correlate with which switches, which buttons correlate with which buttons, so that'll help you set this up. But I've set this up as close to the actual aircraft as I possibly can, and let's go through it. So first, we're going to start out here in our engine, instruments, and systems. 1 second, we're going to move me down here just a little bit, and we're going to set up our engines master 1 and 2. Now, you're going to make sure you use the set engine master 1, not toggle engine master 1, not set magnetos, not toggle magnetos, not toggle fuel, or any of that other stuff. It is just set engine master 1 and 2. And you're going to correlate those with joystick button 3 for engine master 1 and joystick button 4 for engine master 2. When you do set these up, just make sure the switches are in the off position, because they get a little cattywampus, they get a little weird when you try to set up a button that's currently active or that's currently being pressed. So just make sure that they're in the off position. Select joystick button 3 for master 1, joystick button 4 for master 2. All right, then we're going to set up our engine ignition start mode and crank selector. That's going to be associated with button 8 for ignition, and that is the little dial in between the two engine master switches below the thrust levers. You're going to twist that to the right, and that's going to be joystick button 8. You're going to twist it to the left, and that's going to be joystick button 7. As for control surfaces, we've got some trimming surfaces. All right, we've got our rudder trim. That's that little dial just above the parking brake. If you twist to the right, that's going to be joystick button 19. And you're just going to, again, use the drop-down menu. Don't try to actually like twist these things, because there could very well be buttons in between and in a center position and in a detent and whatnot. And that's just it's going to make it really difficult for you. So just use the drop-down menu, select joystick button 19 for rudder trim right, select joystick button 18 for rudder trim left. Don't try to do the auto scan and then validate. No. Just use the drop-down menu. As for reset rudder trim, that's going to be joystick button 17, and that is just to the left of the rudder trim dial. We got some secondary control surfaces. We've got our spoiler axis. That's going to be over here to the left. And remember, each time you hear one of these clicks, that's probably a virtual button. So if you try to set this up by just wiggling the axis, you're going to accidentally press those virtual buttons every time you hit one of those clicks. And that's going to accidentally arm that button for that axis as opposed to the actual axis that you want to set up. This took me a while to figure out what was going on. It was like, you just armed that for button 13. Are you sure you want to use button 13? That's not an axis. Are you sure you want to do that? I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to set it up for the axis that I was wiggling. I'm like, am I pressing the wrong button? Am I bumping something? What's going on? So after a lot of trial and error, I realized that there are virtual buttons that are actually active. And if you want to go into your USB game controller setup, go into the advanced, you can technically turn those virtual buttons off. But if you just use the drop-down menu and select joystick R, axis Z, you don't have to worry about any of that. Now, next one is going to be your flap axis. For some reason, I had to reverse this one. I'm not sure what's going on there. You might get, your mileage may vary on this one, but you're going to select joystick L, axis Z. As for brakes, the actual brakes of the aircraft, the toe brakes, I do have them set up on my rudder pedals down beneath. If you want to see a review on those, it'll probably be a really short review, given that it's just brakes and rudder. But if you want to see it, just let me know in the comments. All right. But we do still have parking brake and auto brakes. So remember, you're using the set parking brake, not the toggle parking brake, not parking brake on, not parking brake off, none of that. Set parking brake is going to be to joystick button 20. Make sure that your parking brake is in the up position on your actual control when you do go to set that up, because again, it acts weird if you don't have them in the off position before you try to set them up. The next one is going to be our auto brakes. All the way disarm, nothing. I don't have anything latched to that. For auto brakes low, I've got it set to joystick button 23, and that corresponds with the dial low on the throttle quadrant. Then for auto brakes medium, I've got it set up with joystick button 24. For auto brakes high, I've got that set up for 26. That does mean that the position 3 on this dial is completely blank. I don't have anything set up for it. I don't know what you could honestly set up for it. Tell me in the comments what you come up with. All right. Next one is going to be our autopilot. We don't have a whole lot going on with autopilot. All I've got set up is button 1 for auto throttle disconnect, along with button 2 for auto throttle disconnect. Those are just on the side of the throttle quadrant. And when it comes to power management, remember, just use the drop-down menu. Just use the drop-down menu. Do not try to wiggle these throttle quadrants to get the axis set up the way that you want. Because again, it's just going to grab those virtual buttons on those detents. So for the throttle 2, or the one to the on the right side, or engine 2, it is going to be joystick L, axis Y. And then for throttle 1, it's joystick L, axis 6. I had to reverse them. I'm not sure if that's what everybody has to do. That's what I had to do. As for landing gear, this one took me a while. This one took me a while to figure out. So joystick button 21 is what correlates with the actual landing gear lever. So you're going to set up gear up on joystick button 21 on press. Okay. As for gear down, it's still joystick button 21, but set it for on release. And again, make sure that it is released, or the gear lever is down when you do go to set that up, or else it's not going to take it. So for gear up, it's on press. For gear down, it's on release. You can think of this as if you were using just the keyboard, holding G to hold the gear up. And then when you released the letter G, it let the gear come down. Okay. The stick, though, set up just fine. It's completely set up on the original profile. There is nothing that I had to change. I do like the camera setup. You can change the cameras as the way, whatever you want. I do have my autopilot set up for the autopilot disconnect switch, like you would see in the actual aircraft. So let's get into the simulated actual aircraft, and we've got a couple calibrations we've got to go through when it comes to the Phoenix 320, because you've got your thrust reversers and such. Let's get into it. All right. So to get inside, I can either press the button on the stick that brings me inside, or I can press Control 1, and that will take me right down to the MCDU, or the Multifunction Control Display Unit, or the MCDU, the box, the FMS, whatever you want to call it. All right. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to Config. Okay, Config is going to bring up our simulator controls. This is where we can set up our fuel, our packs, our, etc. But we're going to go down to Controls Config. And we're going to see thrust levers right up here. Right up here. It's the first thing that pops up. We're going to click Calibrate. Calibrate is going to ask me to set these thrust levers to max reverse. So I'm going to bring up those finger clicker things, and I'm going to bring those thrust levers all the way back, and I'm going to click Next Step. Then I'm going to bring them up to idle reverse, which is not all the way out. All right. You still want those little finger clicker things pulled up, but you're just going to set it just to the top of that yellow range for the thrust reversers. Then you're going to click Next Step. Then for idle, just push it up until those little finger clickers go down and you're stuck out of the thrust reverser window. And then you're going to click Next Step. Then it's going to ask for climb, which should be that first virtual button or that first detent. And you're going to click Next Step. Then you're going to set Flex MCT, which stands for, it really just means reduce thrust or maximum continuous thrust. Then you're going to click Next Step. Then you're going to set it for Takeoff Go Around Thrust, which is all the way up. And you're going to hit Next Step and store that calibration. Bring those thrust levers all the way back so the airplane stops yelling at us. And just like any Airbus sim, whether it be one you're training in for work or one you're just playing in, if you've got that little arrow, you got more pages. Hit that arrow button to the right, and you've got other little null zones you can set up. This is for the stick. You can set up the stick whichever way you see fit. The Airbus is a fly-by-wire aircraft, so the way it flies in the sim is pretty dang accurate to the way it flies in real life. So you shouldn't need to set up any kind of null zones if you've got this controller set up, given that it's intended to replicate it. As for flaps, you are going to need to calibrate these, so it's the same way. You're going to click Calibrate. It's going to ask you to set flaps 1. You're going to bring them back to flaps 1. Then you're going to bring them back to flaps 2, flaps 3, flaps full. And you're going to click Calibrate and then store calibration. And we don't have any more things to calibrate. So now let's get into the actual aircraft and take it for a spin with our newly set up controls. But before we do that, let's hear a message from our sponsor.
As I have gotten into my older years, I've definitely noticed that I struggle to keep up with the younger generation when it comes to gaming. With your Fortnites and floss dancing and meta builds, whatever that happens to be, I have recognized that I just can't really keep up anymore. I've tried a number of energy supplements, some that claim to give you wings, and others that claim to have fairly explosive results. But what I usually just end up with is the jitters, and a few hours later, a caffeine crash, and I don't want to play video games anymore anyway at that point. Which is why I've switched to Dubby Energy. Dubby Energy claims to be better with its jitterless energy blend, and might I say, some absolutely delicious flavors. And it costs about the same as what you would expect of a similar sized container. And you're gonna get a whole lot more servings for the same price than if you were to spend that amount on the drink that claims to give you wings. So if you use the link below and you use the promo code CheesePilot, you'll get a pretty decent discount. So with that in mind, scamper on back to them video games. I got some studying to catch up on.
Well, welcome back. Now we're going to go ahead. We're going to set flaps 2. We're going to set our auto brakes to max, and we are going to send those thrust levers up to toga for takeoff, go around thrust. Given that we haven't had a chance to set up anything in the actual FMS, if we were actually doing this from inside the airplane would be incredibly pissed off at us, telling us to set V speeds and everything else. We're not going to go through all that. And we're rolling. There's a lot of people trying to depart this runway today. Now, I do have the hat set up for all these different views, and it's actually really convenient to be able to just move around the aircraft. I can't wait to actually stream, which, by the way, Wednesdays is when we're going to be doing Microsoft Flight Sim, doing a whole bunch of teaching. So if you're interested, come follow on Cheese Pilot. You should see a little thing pop up. And there's our rotate speed, bringing that nose up 3 degrees per second. Nose is up, positive climb, gear can come up. We are through our first flap speed. Let's go ahead and bring those flaps up to 1. Let's head inside the aircraft to set up the autopilot. It's asking for lever climb, so bring those back to climb. We're going to set our speed up at 200 knots because we're just going to be hanging out in the adder. So there's 200. We're going to keep that there, and we're going to set 2,000 for our pattern altitude. And we're going to start our crosswind. Now, the one thing I was a little disappointed with is I haven't found a way to set up how to use the autopilot for any of these things. Oh, helps if I actually turn the autopilot on. Awkward. We're not going to set manage speed because we want to actually fly the airplane with the autopilot. But the one thing, as I was saying, is I was a little disappointed about the inability to set up any of these extra buttons that are on the joystick to work the autopilot. I wanted to be able to set one of these buttons for heading up and heading down, speed up, speed down, vertical speed up, vertical speed down, altitude windows, etc., instead of having to come in and actually scroll it. Let me know if you can figure out how to set that up. I couldn't figure out how to set that up, so I'd really love some help from the community on that one, because I feel like it would really help make it a much more enjoyable experience with this stick to have some kind of autopilot management with just the stick, so that we don't have to come inside the aircraft to adjust the autopilot. We can purely fly the aircraft from the outside with no autopilot. Or correction, with the autopilot. That's what I was talking about. We want the autopilot. Now we are in our downwind. And I'm going to set up one little thing. We're going to activate approach phase so that the airplane will start managing its own speed for the approach. And we're going to head back outside and disconnect the autopilot. This thing is much easier to fly when the autopilot is handling the thrust. And we're going to line up for the perpendicular runway of the one that we took off from, just because it seemed like there was a bit of a crosswind on that takeoff. So we are actually in our base right now. It seems like there's a large amount of traffic here today. We're going to set the next notch of flaps before we start descending. The aircraft is slowing down all on its own. Brought those thrust levers back to idle. Such a pretty airplane. Let's pay attention to what we got going on. All right. Bring those gear down and start turning our final. Now, with this being an air transport category jet, you shouldn't need much rudder at all. Now we're going to head back inside for the landing, because I just can't seem to land this thing from outside, if I'm just going to be entirely honest. I'm correcting. Correcting. What's a stabilized approach? There we go. Stabilized by 500, right? Gears down. Then let's arm those ground spoilers. Correcting. I guess we're gonna take the go around. That didn't go well at all. Gear up. Flaps 2. Plus, that's a really short runway. I don't know what we were thinking trying to land on that thing. I don't know what I was thinking trying to land on that thing. But as you can see, even through a go around, using this set of controls makes it so much easier than trying to use like a Cytec X52 or like the Warthog or something, because it represents the aircraft. So if you plan on spending a good bit of time in the Airbus in Microsoft Flight Sim, I would definitely recommend picking this up. And again, not sponsored by ThrustMaster at all. So this is my personal opinion of this control surface, or of this set of controls. All right, because I have the Cytec X52. I've had it for a number of years at this point, and to be honest, it wasn't really an enjoyable experience to use the Cytec X52 in Microsoft Flight Sim because it didn't properly represent the aircraft. So I'm constantly searching around, like, where's that button, where's that switch, what did I set that up for, right? And with this, it solves all of those problems that I was having. So if you're looking for something to use other than, the Logitech Turtle Beach or Turtle Beach in their yoke setup, or Logitech in their yoke setup, you're looking for something that properly represents an air transport category jet that doesn't take up a whole lot of space. Like the Boeing system takes up a whole lot of space. You got that big old yoke right there. I'd definitely recommend picking this up. I have no idea how much it costs. I think it's about $300. So if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure you drop a follow, subscribe, hit that bell icon so you get notified every time we put out more aviation-based content. Is really what this channel is all about. So other than that, keep it cheesy.